Hello there, and welcome to Nerd.World Films, where today I'm picking up in my Star Trek movies talks series, where today we're discussing the 7th Star Trek movie. Some love it, some hate it. We're talking Star Trek Generations, the literal meeting of the generations, hence the title. I'm sure that wasn't lost on anybody, where the original series crew and the then new crew of the Next Generation era come together for one beautiful blending of the series. It's the swan song of the original series and the beginning of the new series crew's adventures in the movie universe. It is also the end of the Galaxy-class USS Enterprise D, and that is a spoiler in case you haven't seen the film, which if you've not seen the film, why are you watching this? Go watch it. Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and check out my other two channels, Nerd.World and Nerd.World History, that are both linked down below. They're very different channels, but they may be of interest if you like this video or any of the other videos on this channel. Before we fully get into the video, I just want to mention that this is now sponsored by my sponsor, Relentless Rebels, who again are linked in the description below. Follow the link to their website, check it out. They do Viking style jewelry. If that's something you think you're into, there is a promo code NERD20, all in capitals, that when you reach checkout, put that in the coupon and you'll get a 20% discount on any of your purchases. And now, let's get into Star Trek Generations. To kick us off, Star Trek Generations begins in the late 23rd century at the commissioning ceremony, or at least the shakedown cruise to the USS Enterprise B, NCC 1701B, an Excelsior-class starship under the command of Captain John Harriman. An inexperienced young officer and at least some of the original crew of the Enterprise A, the ship's predecessor, are there for the commissioning and the launch. Now, during this little excursion or run around the block, they pick up on a distress signal from an Ilorian transport, almost likely two transports bringing Ilorian refugees to the Federation. They've been caught in a spatial ribbon of some kind, completely unknown to the Federation, which would eventually become known as the Nexus. Now, at the moment, they don't know what that is, and Harriman is hesitant to take his ship into the Nexus as he can't beam the crew off and doesn't want to risk his shiny new starship. Kirk tells him that command comes with risk, and they eventually go in. Now, condense this story down. Basically, one of the ships is destroyed, but they save most of the people from the other one before it's destroyed, but not before the Enterprise B is hit by a huge energy discharge that hits the secondary hull, creating a huge gap in the hull from which Kirk is seemingly sucked out into space and killed. Unbeknownst to everyone, he actually ended up inside the Nexus, which is a sort of alternate reality of some description where your greatest fantasies can come true and feel pretty close to real. We then skip forward, and one of the survivors of that ship is the nefarious Dr. Tolian Soren, played by the wonderful Malcolm McDowell. He'll be the villain of the piece along with the Duras sisters. Now, he's working with the Duras sisters to develop a weapon for them to aid in the Klingon Civil War. His actual goal is to use this weapon to destroy several stars, to alter the path of the Nexus, as getting into it is not easy, and he wants to return to paradise. He finds just existing in this world painful to him. He was one of the people who was beamed from the ship, but seemingly they may have actually beamed him out of the Nexus as he was begging to be returned and sent back, but Chekhov had him sedated. Now, as I said, he's looking for a way back in, and he's worked out that he can't fly into the Nexus, but if he gets it to sort of wash over him, he will be taken in it, and he'll return to paradise. But in order to do this, he's willing to sacrifice entire star systems, including an entire civilization living on a world in the system. Now, the Klingons get out of this the weapon, as it also alludes to the story that the Romulans are after it as well, as the Romulans have been experimenting with trilithium-based weapons, which is the type of weapon. This weapon can stop all fusion within a star, theoretically, but it's never been proven. The Romulans are after it, and he steals or borrows some trilithium from them, it would seem, and they come looking for it at a Federation observation post where he was secretly conducting this research. The civilian station where he was there was attacked by the Romulans, but they couldn't find what they were looking for, and they left. The Enterprise D responded to that distress call and finds Soren aboard. He eventually manages to launch his probe, or missile, whatever you want to call it, into the star, which collapses it, causing a huge shockwave that destroys everything inside the system. Guinan, knowing who Soren is and how obsessed he is with returning to the Nexus, as she was also previously in it, knows just how fanatical and how far he will go. He was obsessed with it. Others that she knows have got past it, even though they never get it fully out of their system. But he's obsessed. He's going to get back in there no matter what. Now, he aids the Duras sisters in defeating the Enterprise by torturing LaForge after they get his hands on him, modifying his little cybernetic implants. He uses a transceiver. They get the Enterprise's codes to their shields while the Enterprise is trying to stop them because they realize that he's going to destroy the Viridian star system. By doing so, he'll alter the course of the Nexus and the Nexus will wash over him and he'll be back into it. The problem is the Viridian system is inhabited by a pre-warp civilization that have no chance of escaping such destruction of their homeworld. Unfortunately, he is actually successful, but Picard is taken into the Nexus, and there he meets the sort of echo of Guinan, who guides him to another Starfleet officer who, from his point of view, has also only just arrived, and that will be Captain James Tiberius Kirk. He manages to convince Kirk after some persuading that the Nexus isn't real, even though Kirk thinks maybe the universe owes him one for all the times he saved Earth and all the lives he has saved, as he was more than just a Starfleet captain. This man was a hero. And maybe this could be his perfect retirement, an eternity in paradise. But he realizes it isn't real, and there are some things that are more important, like billions of people about to die. So he returns back to a point in space and time before the Viridian star was destroyed, so they can stop Soren. I always did wonder why they didn't go further back, maybe, and stop him before he destroyed the first star. Stop this whole chain of events, just materialize and phaser him somewhere, but whatever. But they do, and they accomplish it, and big spoiler here, this is where Kirk dies. He dies saving the Viridian people, or whatever they're actually called, and helping to defeat Soren. And his parting words, aside from "oh my," which is possibly the worst last words of anyone ever, was basically the words of wisdom he gave to Captain Picard, which was never let them promote him or take him out of that chair, because there he can make a difference, which we now know many years later Picard would accept the rank of Admiral, something he would clearly regret. So he should have listened to Kirk, really. And that's basically the story of Star Trek Generations in a nutshell. Of course, it has more nuance and story to it than that, and I personally found it, I'm in the middle on this film, kind of plodding a little bit in places. I think the subplot about Picard's brother and nephew dying in a fire, although clearly helps fuel his character a little bit, was kind of unnecessary and dragged the film out a little bit. I also think that the potential of the story of how the Romulans were involved here is the Romulans have never been a particularly big enemy in any of the movies. They featured in a few of them, but in almost every Star Trek film there is at least one Klingon in one form or another, whether it be Worf just aboard the Defiant or the Enterprise or whatever, or whether it's Klingon holographic computer simulations in Star Trek 2, which is pretty much all they are in that movie. In every other film there are literal Klingons, either as a villain, antagonist, or presence in some form. Or probably being the one with, again, very little, it's mostly Klingon ambassador and the bird of prey. But the Romulans have never been fully fleshed out as a villain in any of the Star Trek movies, and I thought there was a story potential here, or perhaps a lost story, where we see more of how the Romulans were involved with Soren. It might have been more interesting for him to be in league with the Romulans than with the Duras sisters. That said, the Duras sisters did make for fantastic villains, and were some of the greatest villains I think Star Trek ever had, and they really stand out and they shine in this movie as some of its better protagonists. And I actually think, although Soren is a little two-dimensional maybe, he's a sort of cartoonish, cardboard cutout villain, I think a little bit. The Duras sisters we know more of their backstory from both The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and they're a welcome addition in this film. It's not overly preachy. It does teach us lessons about obsession and other things, and comes out with that what is time is the fire in which we burn, which is, no one says that they say. Who says? You say that. No one else says that. Time is not the fire in which we burn. I've been stuck on that for over 20 years since this film came out. That is not a saying, Soren. Maybe it's an Ilorian saying, but it's not a saying just because you say it's a saying. So anyway, as I said, there is the story of Star Trek Generations in a basic nutshell. This film does see the sad departure of the Enterprise D, as it is crashed by Deanna Troi into the surface of a planet. She should never be allowed to take the helm. She's a fine counselor, but she's a god-awful pilot. Where's Tom Paris when you need him? Of course, the Duras sisters were successful in destroying the bulk of the ship and causing the saucer to crash. And again, that is what we'll get to in a bit as to why that had to happen. But on to the next part of the video. So now we have the cast of Star Trek Generations, which of course we'll touch on them a little, but they need no introductions. We're all Trekkies here. We've got the original series cast, and we have the new cast at the time of the Next Generation. Sir Patrick Stewart, Jonathan Frakes, Brent Spiner, all veteran sci-fi as well as classical actors and directors. Of course, Jonathan Frakes is now quite a well-known director as well. Patrick Stewart's done a little, but he's mostly an actor, but a very, very fine one. Michael Dorn, he's a Klingon. LeVar Burton likes to read books. And of course, we were introduced in this movie to Alan Ruck as the captain of the Enterprise B, who's gone on to do a few actually very good fan movies, actually, including Of Gods and Men, which was made by Tuvok himself. And it's really good. If you've not seen it, it's on YouTube. It's by Trek Renegades. Oh, Renegades they might just be on as now. They also did Star Trek Renegades, and they're doing the new Renegades series, which is a series that's more inspired by Star Trek than is actually Star Trek. But both Of Gods and Men and Star Trek Renegades are set in the Star Trek universe. Of course, they are non-canon, but they are still excellent. And Of Gods and Men was the first one. And he comes back to play Captain Harriman of the Enterprise B. And it's really, really good. I recommend it. And of course, Malcolm McDowell as the main villain, Dr. Tolian Sor. Now, he's a bit of a two-dimensional character, but he is by far not a two-dimensional actor. He has done various films, from Tank Girl, which you shouldn't underestimate. It's a pretty good film, aside from all the gross kangaroo sex that's in it. And he's also done things like Sleepwalkers and other sort of older films that are really, really good. He wasn't in Sleepwalkers. Forget I said that. Anyway, fantastic actor. Been around, and you know he's on screen, you know he's a villain, almost certainly, but he's always such a good one, isn't he, chewing the scenery. The film also stars, of course, Lursa and Betor, who it's very sad that this lady has now passed away, but she was, of course, one of the best characters in Star Trek, and they had a good pedigree from the games. They had a pedigree from Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, where they appeared routinely as some of the villains trying to take over the Klingon Empire, where they began trying to get their little brother to become the Chancellor. Later, they just try and take over themselves. They conspire with the Romulans. The Duras family in general has a long history of being treacherous and untrustworthy members of the Klingon Empire, but still very wealthy and powerful ones, often able to maintain a position of authority where they shouldn't. And of course, Brian Thompson, just want to mention him, fantastic actor. He's another almost Jeffrey Combs level. He's just in everything. He's played a Jem'Hadar, he's played a Klingon. He's played more than one Klingon, I think, but he's been around. He's another one of those actors in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, everything. Great. And the director, David Carson, of course. David Carson was a veteran Star Trek director, having directed episodes of Deep Space Nine and The Next Generation. He also did things like Smallville, Nash Bridges, and other such TV shows before being given the helm of this. And it's always a good idea, in my opinion, to give the creative talent behind the screens the authority, who have some kind of background with it. It's good when you get a blending of both actors and directors and producers, those people that have a history of doing either the genre or, even better, the actual movie or series itself. Now, that didn't work with Shane Black and The Predator, but I'd say 99% of the time it is a good idea to give someone the helm who knows the material, and this guy clearly knows the material, as this is a pretty good bloody film, all in all. So that's the cast and crew, some of the crew anyway, of Star Trek Generations. As I said, I'm not going to go too much into the known Star Trek actors because we all know who they are. So let's touch on a few bits of trivia from this film, particularly a few nuggets of the highlights. I mentioned earlier this was the last movie the Enterprise D would feature in. Now, there was a reason for that. The Enterprise D was the new ship, the hero vessel for the series Next Generation, started in 1987, which was pretty much a decade before this film. The reason they decided to get rid of the ship is they were anticipating that it would likely be making more Next Generation spin-off movies, and the Enterprise D just isn't cinematic. When it's blown up to that level, the details are lost a little bit. They wanted something more cinematic, but they were stuck with this ship. They had to do something with it, so the decision was made to get rid of it, destroy it, so they could replace it with a new ship. Now, they could have done this a different way and just introduced it with a new film, a new ship, a new hero ship for the movie as commissioning, instead of having the Enterprise B being commissioned, have the Enterprise E being commissioned. But they went with, obviously, they felt that introducing the B and another new ship was a bit much for audiences. Also, a lot of people would be questioning where was the Enterprise D, so they didn't do it that way. They saved it for Star Trek First Contact. A good decision in my opinion. I still think the Enterprise D works well in this movie, but it doesn't, because of its bulk and its shape, it doesn't do well on a cinema screen. It takes up too much of the screen, basically. They needed something sleeker and more sexy. The Enterprise E, basically. Also, the Enterprise D was clearly a vessel of exploration. It was what it's always touted as. The Enterprise E is a battle cruiser, which fits in more with the action-packed themes of the movies. So that's why they got rid of it. Another one which I quite liked, and I always assumed this was something that had actually happened because the Klingon... I mean, canonically it makes more sense. When Picard is beamed down to the Viridian planet to meet with Soren, he doesn't have his comm badge on. And this is because you'd assume the Klingons took it off him so he couldn't be beamed back to the Enterprise. That kind of makes sense, but in reality what actually happened is when they got out to the desert to film, they'd forgot to pack the badge and it was lost. It would take too long and too much money to send someone back to go get it or make another one, so they just filmed without it and hoped no one would notice. Fans like me have put it into their head that most likely the Klingons took it off them, and which would make, as I said, more sense. A fairly well-known piece of information about this movie is Malcolm McDowell himself is the uncle of Alexander Siddig, who is obviously well known for playing Dr. Julian Bashir, one of my actual favourite characters in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Which, when I learned that, kind of blew my mind. I don't know why it blew my mind so much. Of course, a lot of people are related in Hollywood, but it was very interesting. And it's like anything. There's lots of bits of behind the scenes, bits and pieces of information about this movie that are out there, but I find these little nuggets to be some of the more interesting elements of it, and I don't want to go on too much with all the trivia information because this video is already hitting 20 minutes long, and that's pretty much my limit for one of these videos. So if you want to put in the comments below anything else you know about behind the scenes or any other bits of trivia about this movie which I may or may not know, want to compare notes, put it in the comments below. And that brings us to the last part of this video, my scoring of this film. As traditional of them, I give it a 4 out of 6, which I give it a lower score than some of my other Star Trek movies simply because it's a bit plodding in places. It has some superfluous storylines I think could have been trimmed and made a bit more tidy and more efficient, and I think that the Romulan subplot could have been and should have been more greatly explored. I also think the fairly ignominious death, although it was the heroic one of Captain James C. Kirk, was a little wasted. But 4 out of 6, decent score for any movie really in my listing. So there we have it. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you for watching, and bye bye.